The dawn in the Appalachian mountains didn't arrive with roosters, but with a red glow that seemed torn from hell itself. Old Jack Herrera, with his hat pulled back and his hands still damp from morning washing, stood frozen in front of the barn, sniffing that penetrating smell of burning pine and resin that the wind was dragging from the ridge. It wasn't the aroma of a fire for cooking tortillas, but the dry stench of disaster. In the distance, the horizon looked like a row of embers shaken by invisible hands. The smoke slipped in spirals, seeping between the oak tree crowns like gray serpents. Jack clenched his jaw. If those sparks cross the path, we lose the cornfield. And not just that. If you like real stories of faith, survival, and community, subscribe to the channel and join us in this story. The air was so dry that when he swallowed, he felt a handful of dust passing. The sky, stained orange and black, had that tone that announces the wind isn't thinking of giving any relief. From the barn, the chickens cackled nervously, and the donkey scratched the ground with his hoof, as if foreseeing danger. Jack went down the path toward the cornfield. The corn leaves, still green, crackled brittle under his fingers. The heat of recent weeks had sucked the sap from everything. He felt a pang in his chest. It wasn't just his harvest. It was the inheritance of his father, and before him his grandfather. It wasn't just a simple plot of land. It was decades of work, cold mornings, and hands, split by the machete. From the ridge crest, a dry noise like the crack of wood in a bread oven announced the fire was advancing. The south wind blew hard, and a cloud of ash rose, falling in black specks on Jack's hat. In that instant, he heard footsteps behind him. Neighbor, it was Tom with a sweaty forehead and wide eyes. The fire already jumped the creek over at the Ramirez place. If we don't do something, it's coming straight down. Jack looked toward the dusty road that led to his house. He knew Mary was there, keeping preserves and corn in the pantry for winter. There was no time for discussion. I'm going to warn Mary. You start clearing a fire break, ordered Jack. What about water trucks? Asked Tom skeptically. Don't mention them to me. The county said they're in another area, replied Jack with a snort. He hurried up to the house. Mary was at the stove making cornbread. When she saw him enter, she knew something was wrong. What happened, old man? She asked, barely flipping the bread. Fire's coming this way. Get some buckets ready and save what's important. I'm going back up. Mary didn't say anything. With quick hands, she started putting documents and photos into a bag along with the image of Jesus they had on the dresser. Smoke was already seeping in through the door cracks, mixed with the smell of toasted corn. Jack went out with his machete hanging at his waist and felt the heat coming in waves from the ridge. The fire's roar was like a living animal, hungry. Each second that passed, the red line got closer, swallowing grass, branches, fences. In his chest, a mix of fear and determination grew. He knew that day wasn't just about saving some plants, but about proving how far his faith and strength could reach. The wind blew hard again, throwing a handful of embers at his feet. Jack clenched his fists and thought, today won't break me, even if the devil himself comes. Without looking back, he began to run toward the firebreak, determined to face what was coming. Old Jack had always said the land was known by hands, not papers. Since childhood, he'd learned to feel the soil's moisture by pushing his fingers to the knuckles. He could read the sky by cloud color and recognize bird songs that announce rain. The cornfield he tended wasn't just corn. There grew squash, beans, wild greens, and among them the avocado trees his father had grafted over 30 years ago. That morning, before the smoke pulled him from his routine, he'd watered the small garden behind the house. Water fell in thin streams. The well was running low, and each bucket took effort. With patience and faith, everything grows, he'd murmur, remembering his grandfather, a man with large hands and slow steps, who taught him not to curse the weather or the harvest. In the house's corridor, Mary checked the supplies. Corn in sacks, jars of guava jam, dry peppers hanging from the ceiling. They'd spent years selling at the market. She with her stall of hot drinks and tamales, he with fresh vegetables and avocados. They didn't live rich, but they didn't lack for basics either. That stability was the fruit of early mornings and caring for every penny. "Old man, do you remember when you said this year we'd plant more squash?" asked Mary, barely smiling. "Yes, and I wasn't wrong," he replied proudly. "Look at how the plants are doing." "Too bad ... he interrupted himself, remembering the smoke. The previous day's heat had been unbearable, but in the early morning the air felt different, heavy, charged with electricity. The song of the wild ducks sounded harsher, and even the dog had started barking without apparent reason. Shortly after, Tom arrived on horseback with his face smudged. He was a lifelong neighbor, a strong man who usually joked about everything, but this time he came with his brow furrowed. "Neighbor, the wind changed. The fire's heading straight for the Cedar Ridge. If it comes down from there, it'll hit us directly." Jack swallowed hard. He knew that ridge well. It was like a green guardian protecting the community. If it burned, the damage wouldn't be just material. "What about emergency services?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "No sign of them," replied Tom with frustration. "They say they're handling another front in the next county." At that moment the house phone rang. It was Lucy, his daughter studying nursing in the city. Her voice trembled. "Dad, I saw the news. Are you all okay?" "We're fine, honey, but the fire's close. Don't worry. Your mother and I know what to do." He lied to not worry her more. "Please don't take risks," she insisted. "Remember, material things can be replaced." Jack nodded, though he knew not everything material could be recovered. The saved seeds, the inherited tools, the land itself. Those things carried history, not just price. When he hung up, he sat silent for a few seconds. Mary looked at him with that mix of worry and confidence that only comes from a lifetime together. "We're going to need help," she finally said. "If Tom brings the boys, I'll take care of water and food. That's what I love about you, woman," replied Jack, smiling half-heartedly. "You never back down." The sun was starting to climb over the mountains, and the heat felt like a blanket squeezing the chest. Jack knew that before midday, everything could change. Fire doesn't wait, especially when the wind pushes it like a wild horse. He tightened the machete at his waist and thought that come what may, he wouldn't let his family's inheritance be lost without a fight. That day faith and work were going to be tested, and he didn't plan to fail. The town woke with the murmur of the creek, that water that runs clear and carries secrets from the forest. Jack, after checking fences and watering the donkey, went down to town with Mary to get salt, soap, and some late squash seeds. The air still carried a hint of old coal, but the morning seemed to want to forget the scares. In the rural park, water gushed cold between moss and twisted roots. Jack stopped a moment beside a spring, put his hand in, closed his eyes, and let the coolness calm his forehead. "Blessed be water," he murmured like greeting a dear friend. Mary smiled. She knew her husband spoke to the earth and creek like they were people. They walked to the market. It smelled of fresh-baked bread, cinnamon, and brown sugar. Old Kata was arranging her herbs. "Good morning, my children," she greeted with a grave voice. "The forests. Restless, but you don't break if you have faith." "Faith and organization," said Mary, squeezing her hand. "Tonight there'll be prayer at the chapel to ask for rain and for good sense," added Jack, because whoever plays with fire ends up crying. On a table, wheat bread gleamed golden brown. A young man sang a soft melody, and the tune wove with the hammering of machetes. A blacksmith was sharpening to rhythm. There was life, but also unease. Between stalls rumors ran that someone burned stubble, without permission, that the wind carried fire to forbidden slopes, that the county promised water trucks and didn't deliver. In the plaza, in the shade of the ash trees, Father Ignacio talked with several neighbors. He held a notebook full of names. "We're going to organize work crews," he explained. "Clearing paths, digging water channels for when it rains in Rosary at dusk. Faith doesn't remove responsibility." "That's what I say," said Jack, "and permits to open fire breaks, just that later, fines come and you never know who to talk to." "I already spoke with the county engineer," replied the father. "The official will come soon to explain what we can and can't do." The agronomist arrived shortly after, tall, with rolled-up sleeves and a worn folder. "Listen," he said, tracing with pencil. "The ridge can't take more cutting. If we remove coverage, the soil will go. And without soil, there's no crops or avocados." "What about water?" asked a woman. "My well's already running dry. Creek starts good, but downstream it seeps away," replied the agronomist. "We need it to recharge with rain. If we work together, it's possible." The murmurs grew in waves. Some nodded, others frowned. Just words, an old man in a wide hat muttered. "Let's see if permits don't just help some people make money." Mary breathed deeply. She knew that mistrust. In times of hardship, suspicions grow like weeds. "Come on, Jack," she said. "Let's get candles and flour. Tonight we pray, and tomorrow we wake early for the work." On the way back, they passed by the small chapel. The priest was ringing the bell with slow strikes that seemed to order people's hearts. Inside, a couple of women swept the floor and placed wildflowers. Jack left 2 coins and stayed a moment looking at the image of Jesus. He didn't ask for anything big, just said that we don't lose our judgment. When they left, they ran into Tom, coming with a dark face. "What's going on, neighbor?" Jack asked. "Word is a couple of guys want to expand their garden in a protected area. If they burn stubble, we all pay." "Better they don't," replied Jack dryly. "Fire here doesn't respect anything." The sun climbed, and the heat pressed like a wet blanket. Yet the town had a stubborn pulse. The singing, the bread, the bell, the prayers, the engineer's plan, the healer's hand, everything together formed a net that with luck and work could sustain them. Jack felt it clearly, like feeling the good grain in wood, and as he held the bag of seeds, he thought the land listens when you care for it. The heat had become an uncomfortable guest that wouldn't leave even with falling dusk. The grass, dry as old paper, cracked under Jack's boots, and each step raised a fine dust cloud that stuck in the throat. The oak trees with wilted leaves seemed to shrink their branches to resist. In the distance, the south wind whistled between the hills, bringing a disturbing rumble, the crackle of something burning. That morning, Carolina Vargas, the Forest Service firefighter, arrived at the town with her uniform stained and hair tied in a red bandana. She carried a folded map and an expression that didn't allow delays. "It's bad, don't Jack?" she said, spreading the map on her truck bed. "We have 3 active fronts, and one's coming from the Dry Creek side. If we don't open a fire break, the fire eats through the forest." Jack leaned over the paper, following the red-marked lines with his finger. "What about water trucks?" he asked. Carolina shook her head. "Paperwork, forms, signatures, they say they're on the way." Nobody really believes it. Tom, listening, snorted. "Just excuses. Fire doesn't wait for stamps." Bureaucracy was an old obstacle. The official who theoretically should coordinate resources had passed through the plaza early, promising water tanks would arrive in a few hours. Nobody really believed those hours. "Look, Don Jack," continued Carolina, "if we get 10 men with machetes and shovels, we can open a 6-foot strip along the old cedar path. That would give us some space." Jack looked at the sky. The sun stabbed like a needle, and there wasn't a cloud. The wind brought him a stronger smell of burned wood. "I'll get the men," he said. "But if things get rough, nobody plays hero. We want to be alive to replant after." While Tom went ahead to warn other neighbors, Jack got his machete and shovel. When he returned, he found Carolina organizing 3 young volunteers, 2 students, and a day laborer who'd left his chickens with his wife. She was teaching them to use the shovel to cut surface roots and leave the earth bare so the fire had nothing to feed on. "The key," she explained, "is not leaving dry leaves or branches in the strip. Fire moves looking for food. If it doesn't find any, it stops." The group walked to the path entrance. Each step raised more heat from the ground. The murmur of flames, though distant, was felt in the chest. Jack started marking the line with his machete, cutting dead brush. Carolina and the youth cleared behind. Sweat poured down their foreheads, mixing with dust. Midway through work arrived Benitez in an official truck waving papers. "I have the permit to expand the firebreak," he announced. Jack looked at him sideways without stopping his swing. "Better save that as a souvenir, because if we wait for paperwork, there won't be a shadow left here." Benitez swallowed hard. The wind shifted and brought a gust of ash. The particles stung the eyes and made people cough. Jack felt a slight burn in his nose. He knew that sign. "Hurry up, people. This doesn't smell far anymore." The sound of shovels and machetes became a pressing rhythm. The strip grew, but the roar on the slope grew too. Jack felt that each dry trunk that fell under his tool was another breath for the cornfield, his house, everyone. When the sun started to set, the strip was almost ready. The sweat had soaked their clothes, but the fire hadn't arrived yet. Jack breathed deeply, knowing the next day would be decisive, and that the wind could turn all that effort to dust in minutes. The sky began to stain with thick orange, as if someone had poured paint on the clouds. Jack felt a different heat, heavier, coming from above and sinking into the skin like a hot needle. The air smelled of burned resin and dry earth, and each breath left a bitter taste on the tongue. "This isn't a scare anymore," he muttered, tightening his machete. "The fire comes with hunger." From the old cedar path, you could see how the flames, tall as houses, jumped the black line they'd opened hours before. The south wind, playful and treacherous, had pushed the embers further, and now fire came down with the force of a stampede. "Jack!" shouted Tom, running toward him. "The smoke's closing off the west exit. If we want to save anything, it's now or never." Jack felt a blow to the stomach. It wasn't just the cornfield at risk. In the house remained the land documents, the property title, the papers his grandfather had kept like they were gold, and with them the notebooks where he kept harvest records, selected seeds, everything that gave meaning to years of work. "You go with Carolina and protect people," ordered Jack. "I'm going to the house." "You're crazy," replied Tom. "The smoke's coming down fast. You'll choke." "Crazy or not, I can't leave those things to burn," said Jack. Tom looked at him, pressed his lips, and said nothing more. The walk back felt longer than normal. Each step raised. Dust mixed with ash and heat hit like someone following with a blowtorch. The roosters weren't singing, only dry cracks and the roar of fire approaching. At the door, Mary waited with a bucket of water in one hand and a cloth covering her mouth. "I already saved clothes and food, but I need the drawer from the bedroom," she said with a firm voice. They went in together. Jack opened the old wooden chest and pulled out the documents, the notebooks, and the image of Jesus that always sat beside the bed. The dark wooden figure had one hand raised as if giving a blessing. Jack wrapped it in cloth and held it against his chest. "Let's go now," he said. In the yard, the donkey brayed nervously. Mary freed it so it could find shelter. The smoke was already getting in the throat, forcing them to cough. On the way they crossed with old Cata, guiding 2 children toward the plaza. "Don't stay," she shouted. The wind changed and the ravine's on fire. Jack nodded and quickened his pace. Each time he looked toward the ridge, he saw the flames multiplying, licking tree trunks and fences. A pine tree crackled and fell, shooting sparks that the wind carried far. In the midst of that run, Father Ignacio's words came to mind. "Calm is half the victory, son." But in that moment, calm seemed an impossible luxury. When they reached the plaza, Carolina was receiving evacuees, checking names in a notebook. The smoke made everyone's eyes red and skin wet with sweat. "Did you bring it?" she asked, pointing to the bundle Jack carried. "Yes, but the fire respects nothing. If it keeps going, tomorrow there won't even be a plaza left." Carolina looked at him without responding, and in her silence was more truth than in any promise. Jack clenched his teeth. Between tiredness and fear, a certainty struck him. The night was still coming and the wind could get worse. And deep down, though he didn't want to admit it, doubt was starting to creep in. What if Tom was right? What if he'd risked his life for things that wouldn't stop the loss anyway? The evacuation order came like a whisper that soon became a collective shout. Carolina, with a firm voice going group to group, "Everyone toward the plaza. Take what you can carry and don't stop." The smoke fell like a gray blanket on the dirt streets, and the hidden sun behind seemed a red disk about to go out. Jack, with Mary at his side, advanced among neighbors, carrying bags, sacks, chickens, and even a pig tied with rope. "Let's go, Doan," Jack urged Tom, guiding two elderly people by the arms. The wind changed again. The air burned the eyes and scratched the throat. A child cried, looking for his dog. A woman shouted for her husband, who didn't appear. Old Kata, wrapped in a black shawl, walked slowly, guiding three children with maternal calm. "Haste and hurry tangle the feet," she murmured, though her hands squeezed the children's firmly. Jack noticed Mary carried under her arm the bag with documents and the image of Jesus. Despite the chaos, her steps were firm. "When we get there, I'll make water with lemon for everyone," she said. "The smoke dries even the soul." At a corner, a group discussed. Phone signals had become intermittent, and rumors ran fast that fire had surrounded the ravine, that flames had reached the road, that water trucks wouldn't come. "Just gossip," grumbled Jack. But better not to trust, he decided, taking a shortcut to avoid the narrow alley where smoke was building up. At the turn, he ran into Ephraim, his cousin, carrying a backpack and coughing nonstop. "You see what happens when you trust in miracles," he said with a bitter half-smile. "Only the ones who run get out. Here only survive those who run." "Not the moment to argue," replied Jack seriously. "Help me guide these people to the plaza." Ephraim didn't answer, but joined the group. When they reached the clearing, Carolina received them with a notebook and whistle. She was checking names to make sure nobody was left behind. Jack knelt beside an old man breathing with difficulty. "Do you have an inhaler?" he asked. "Left it at home," the man whispered, and closed his eyes for a moment. Mary ran toward a truck where volunteers distributed water bottles and looked for something that would help. She returned with a bottle of eucalyptus oil that old Kata immediately handed her. "Take it slow, Don Julian," instructed the healer. "It'll open your chest." Meanwhile, Jack watched the horizon. The fire line seemed higher than at noon. He wondered if the cornfield would still be standing, or if he'd find only black earth when he returned. That thought squeezed his chest more than the smoke. Suddenly a wind gust dragged swirling embers toward a nearby metal roof. A spark ignited the straw piled there. "Water here," shouted Carolina. Several ran with buckets, putting out the fire before it grew. The scare reminded them that danger wasn't just on the ridge, but in every corner where fire could sneak in. "This is going to last," said Tom, panting. "Better we organize watches." Jack nodded. His eyes sought instinctively the image of Jesus wrapped in cloth, as if from there he could draw strength. He felt that though smoke surrounded them, there was still a thread of calm he could hold on to. But inside him, unease grew. If the wind changed again, not even the plaza would be safe. And he knew that at some point he'd have to return to the cornfield, even alone. The night had fallen, but the sky wasn't dark. The orange glow of the fire lit the hills like a twisted dawn. In the plaza, neighbors tried to sleep on mats and benches, though the heat and smoke smell made it almost impossible. Jack, sitting against a wall, didn't stop looking toward his cornfield. "Old man, stay here," said Mary, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I'm just going to take a walk along the cedar path," he answered, avoiding her gaze. "I want to see if the fire break's still holding." She knew him too well to insist. She handed him a damp cloth to cover his mouth. "Don't be long, and if things get bad, come back." Jack nodded and disappeared among the streets, machete at his side. The smoke formed low clouds that moved like ghosts between the houses. As he moved away from the plaza, the fire sound became clearer, a deep roar interrupted by dry cracks of branches giving way. Reaching the path, he felt the change in air. The wind blew from a different angle, dragging sparks that gleamed like devil's fireflies. Firebreak they'd opened earlier was intact in some sections, but in others, dry leaves and branches already covered the ground again, as if the forest wanted to close its wounds. Jack went in a bit further, careful not to lose direction. The heat increased with each step, and ash fell on his hair and shoulders. He remembered Carolina's words. If the wind changes here, there's no quick exit. A dry crack stopped him. To his left, a fallen trunk burned from inside, releasing embers that the wind pushed opposite to the main fire. That meant new fires could start, maybe closer to the houses. "Damn," he whispered, measuring the risk. Logic told him to go back, but something inside pushed him forward. He advanced a few meters more until smoke clouded his vision. He coughed, feeling the air thicken, and for an instant lost his sense of direction. "Hell, which way did I come?" he muttered, turning around himself. Shadows and firelight mixed, blurring references. The sun was gone and firelight created tricks. Every clearing looked like a path, every shadow an obstacle. A loud crack to his right made him turn. Among the haze, he thought he saw movement, like someone walking away. "Hey!" he shouted, but there was no answer. Could be a neighbor or just a branch falling. The confusion made him stop and close his eyes for a moment, trying to hear more than see. Among the fire's roar and wind's whistle, he managed to hear the murmur of water, very faint, as if coming from below in the ravine. The memory brought his grandmother's voice. "When you don't know which way, listen with your heart. Water always leads home." He opened his eyes, trying to orient by that sound. He took steps in that direction, but smoke closed in again. The heat in his legs was like walking beside an open oven. He knew he was alone, and if the wind shifted again, he could get trapped between two fire fronts. He breathed deeply, as much as the smoke allowed, and decided to keep looking for a clearing. The water murmur was his only reference, but he couldn't be sure it would lead to safety. At that instant, a stronger gust bent branches over him and threw embers around. Jack raised his machete as if he could push fire aside with metal, and felt that from that moment each step would be a bet against time. The heat was unbearable. Jack felt the air he breathed was made of fine embers that scraped inside. The water murmur was still there, barely audible over the fire's roar, and he held on to that sound like someone grabs a rope in a current. Suddenly, among the crackling branches, he heard something different, a voice. It wasn't a cry for help or a firefighter's order. It sounded near, clear, but at the same time impossible to locate. It was serene, without urgency, as if it knew the way by heart. "Toward the water," it said with a tone that seemed to know the path by memory. Jack stopped, his heart pounding at his temples. "Who's there?" he asked, turning around. There was no answer, just the wind's whistle and the crunch of a tree falling ahead. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with cold, because there was no cold. It was something deeper, as if the voice had passed through his chest. And then again, the same voice. Toward the water. It wasn't a harsh command, but an invitation, and there was in it a calm that contrasted with the chaos around. Jack swallowed hard. He wasn't a man to let himself be carried by fantasies, but he also couldn't ignore that since childhood he'd learned to recognize when something didn't come from the common world. "If this is your doing, Lord, guide me right," he said in a low voice, looking toward where he believed the water sounded. He advanced with short steps, feeling the ground with his machete to avoid tripping on roots. As smoke opened at moments, showing pieces of darkened sky. Each time the voice returned, always the same, always serene. Toward the water. In the middle of advancing, a memory hit him suddenly. He was 10 years old, helping his grandfather clean the irrigation ditch. The old man told him, "Water knows how to reach where it needs to go. We just open the way." That teaching, buried under decades of work, now seemed like a compass. The terrain started to slope. The water's murmur became clearer, though mixed with a deep wind buzz. Jack felt his legs weigh as if he carried sacks tied to his ankles. Sweat ran down his back, clouding his vision. A bit more, he told himself, though he wasn't sure if he spoke to himself or answered the voice. The ground became irregular. A thick root caught his foot and almost made him fall. The pain in his ankle was sharp, but he had no time to check it. Breathing became shorter. Each inhalation brought burning in the chest. Then again, toward the water. It was like the voice knew when he was about to give up. Jack clenched his jaw and kept going. In the gloom, he thought he saw a figure a few meters away, tall and dressed in something he couldn't see. Clearly, it didn't walk in haste, seemed simply to advance, waiting for him to follow. "Hey," he shouted, but the figure didn't turn. With each step, the silhouette seemed to approach a clearer point where smoke was less dense. Jack felt a mix of urgency and hope. Suddenly, a loud creak behind announced fire had gained ground. The glow intensified, projecting long shadows on the ground. There was no going back anymore. Follow the voice and figure, or stay at the mercy of flames. He bent forward, and with the machete as a staff accelerated his pace. The water murmur was louder now, almost a song. Though his heart raced and his ankle throbbed, something inside filled with strange certainty. He was going the right direction, though he couldn't explain why. The ground started sloping more steeply, and Jack had to lean on the machete to keep balance. Each downward step made his ankle scream, but the water murmur sounded closer. The air, though still thick with smoke, had a slight coolness he hadn't felt all day. At a turn in the path, a movement caught his attention. From nowhere, a thin dog with patchy fur came out of some brush. It had drooping ears and tongue out, panting from the heat, but its eyes were fixed on him like evaluating. "Where did you come from?" asked Jack without expecting an answer, though the dog took a step forward, and then another, like inviting him to follow. It wasn't the time for questions. Jack decided to let himself be guided, keeping a few meters distance. The animal advanced without hesitation, dodging fallen branches and loose stones. Sometimes it stopped, turned, and waited for him to catch up. The terrain was full of obstacles. Thick roots crossed the path like traps, and some rocks still held the fire's heat, burning if touched. Jack felt sweat mixing with ash sticking to skin. The dog went ahead, not separating from the group. Jack thought that maybe when everything was over, he'd try to keep it. They went past a hollow trunk that still smoked inside. The heat it gave off was so strong, he felt it on his side. The dog, without looking back, went into a narrow space between two rock faces covered with dry moss. On the other side, the water sound became louder, and a gust of fresh air brushed his face. It wasn't total relief, but enough to urge him on. In his mind, the memory of the voice echoed, "Toward the water." He didn't know of a coincidence that the dog appeared just then, or if it was part of the same mystery. He accepted it as part of the same mystery. As they descended, he heard in the distance a church bell, faint, like brought by wind from town. That sound mixed with the running water gave him a strange feeling of company. Not much further, he told himself. Hang on, old man. On a steeper section, his left foot slipped and he fell to his knees. The blow drew a groan. The dog stopped, looked at him, and gave a small bark like hurrying him. Jack got up slowly, ignoring the pain, and kept advancing. They passed beside a hollow trunk that still smoked inside. The heat it gave was so strong, he felt it on his side. The dog, without looking back, squeezed into an area where vegetation, though scorched, seemed more humid. There Jack began to murmur prayers he'd known since childhood, without realizing his lips moved alone. He promised that if he got out alive, he'd bring bread and flowers to the chapel at the next town celebration. The path suddenly opened and showed a narrow stream, bordered with black stones and fallen leaves. Water ran clear, reflecting distant fires' glow on its surface. Jack felt his heart loosen in his chest. He knelt, put his hands in, and let cold water wash his face, neck, and mouth. The taste was clean, as if with each sip the smoke accumulated in his throat went away. The dog drank a little and then sat beside him, panting. "Thanks, friend," said Jack, petting its head. "I don't know who sent you, but you came in time." For a moment everything was silent, except for the running water and his own breathing. But he knew he couldn't stay forever. The fire, though farther, was still alive, and he had to find a safe way out. He stood up, leaning on the machete, and looked toward where the river disappeared among vegetation. He had a feeling that was the way he should follow, though he didn't know how far he had to walk. The river water ran with serene force, calming silence broken only by a distant cracking trunk. Jack breathed deeply, trying to let the coolness fill his lungs. The dog suddenly stood, moving ears like it detected something. "What is it, friend?" asked Jack, following its gaze. Among the mist rising from the stream, he saw metallic glints moving downhill. At first he thought it was fire reflecting on stone, but then he heard voices. "Around here?" shouted a female voice. The dog barked and ran toward the sound. Jack felt relief so big his legs almost didn't hold. From the other side of the river emerged 3 figures with helmets and vests. Carolina led the group, holding a light that jumped in arcs. "Don't, Jack," she exclaimed, crossing by rocks. "I thought we wouldn't find you." He gave a short laugh from tiredness. "Well, I found myself with an unexpected guide," he said, pointing to the dog wagging his tail happily. One of the firefighters offered him a canteen, and he drank with urgency, though the creek water had already calmed his thirst. Carolina checked him quickly, touching his swollen ankle. "It's twisted, not broken," she said. "We'll wrap it and go out through the stream," she indicated. "Up there's impossible." The wind changed again. Jack nodded, feeling his body demand each step taken. While they put the bandage on, Carolina asked, "How did you get here?" He hesitated. He didn't know if to tell about the voice and figure, but finally said, "I heard something, a voice that told me to follow toward the water. Then this dog appeared and guided me here. I don't know if they guided me or if smoke was playing tricks, but it brought me here." The firefighters looked at each other. One smiled sideways, like hearing something hard to believe. Carolina, however, just said, "Whatever it was, it brought you alive. That's what matters." They began moving downriver. The terrain was slippery, and Jack leaned on a firefighter's shoulder while Carolina went ahead clearing branches. The mist rising from the water created a fresh barrier that dulled the smoke smell. "When we reach the old bridge, there's a truck," informed Carolina. From there straight to the support center. Jack walked in silence, listening to water hit stones. He felt strange gratitude, not just for being found, but for that calm that in the middle of everything had settled in his chest. "The town?" he asked suddenly. "Still close, but the firebreak held in some sections," answered Carolina. "People are in the plaza and safe houses. Some resisted leaving, but we convinced them." The dog went a few meters ahead, not separating from the group. Jack thought that maybe when all this ended he'd try to keep it. They reached the old bridge, a structure of wood and stone that creaked with each step. On the other side, sure enough, a truck waited with engine running. Jack got in slowly, helped by two firm hands. Before closing the door, he looked toward the river. The mist still rose, and for a moment he swore he saw the tall silhouette he'd glimpsed before. It didn't move, just stood there watching him. He blinked, and it was gone. "Everything okay?" asked Carolina, seeing him distracted. "Yes, everything's good," he answered, though his voice carried a hint of mystery he didn't plan to explain just then. As the truck started, Jack felt he was leaving behind not just the fire, but a piece of something he'd never forget. The next day, the sky over the town was still covered in gray haze, but the fire's glow was no longer visible. Weak rain, almost timid, fell on the roofs, dampening dust without fully calming the earth. Jack woke on a cot in the community center with his ankle wrapped and his body stiff but alive. Mary approached with a cup of black coffee and bread from Mrs. Catta. "Drink this, old man. You'll need strength." "How's everybody?" he asked, straightening with effort. "Tired, but good. Nobody lost their life. That's already a win," said Mary. Jack nodded. His mind still replayed the previous night like a dream. The voice, the dog, the river. All seemed real and at the same time impossible. In the yard, crews organized to clean debris and evaluate damage. Some spoke in low voices about what happened. Others shared photos of what little remained on their land. The atmosphere was exhaustion, but also relief. Carolina appeared with a notebook. "Jack, good morning. The mayor wants to meet those who were in risk zones to file a report. Can you come?" "Sure. Just let me adjust this leg," he answered, smiling with half his face. They crossed to the tent set up beside the school. There was also Sofia Rojas, a local journalist, writing in a crumpled notebook. She had her hair pulled back and eyes that didn't miss anything. "You're the one who got lost on the ridge?" she asked as soon as Jack entered. "Lost or found, depending how you look at it. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Sophia asked, pencil ready. "We're doing a chronicle. A lot of people are saying it was a miracle." Jack looked at her calmly. "I can tell you what I lived, but I'm not sure you'll like it. The truth matters," she answered. "Then I'll tell you about the fire that trapped me, the voice I heard, the dog that appeared and guided me to the river," said Jack. Sophia wrote without interrupting. When he finished, there was a brief silence. "Do you think it was a vision?" she asked. "I don't know, but if it was a hallucination, it was the most useful one I've had in my life. What would you say to people who don't believe?" "Nothing. I'm not here to convince anyone, just to keep farming when this settles down." Carolina crossed her arms. "I found him at the river's edge. Just that's enough for me." Ephraim, listening from a corner, let out a brief laugh. "I say the old man's lucky, or has an angel with dog legs." "Call it whatever you want," he said. "But if you ever get lost, hope you find one too," replied Jack. Sophia closed her notebook and nodded. "Thanks. This story deserves to be told. Leaving, Jack ran into Benitez, reviewing plans on a table. "We're evaluating. Damage," he said. "The top part burned almost completely, and some avocados were saved. The rest ... The old farmer looked at the landscape. Beyond the ridge, smoke still rose. Tomorrow, the real assessment would begin. But tonight, sitting against a wall, Jack thought about the voice, the figure, the dog. He didn't have explanations, but he had something deeper certainty that he wasn't alone out there, and that some mysteries are meant to be lived, not solved. The town would rebuild. The corn would grow again. And when it did, Jack would remember that in the darkest moment, when fear threatened to crush him, something called him toward the water. And he'd followed. Because in the end, that's what faith is, walking toward water when the world is burning, trusting that someone knows the way home.